about leadership. And it's important, the world needs leadership, but there actually has started to be a lot of masters in leadership, Christian leadership, servant leadership. There's a few authors that are very famous in the last few decades, for about 40, 50 years, at least in America, writing about leadership. But what we especially saw during COVID was a crisis of leadership, not just a crisis of self. The way that the different world leaders dealt with the same crisis was very different and distinct. In fact, at least in America, I know more of the politics there, that they had been anticipating this. She speaks in Dutch. We didn't know. I don't know what she said. I hope it's not public. Huh?
I think this is voice recognition.
Well, voice recognition. How does she know my name? But what was unique in the time when there was a same crisis, different world leaders dealt with it in different ways. And some extremes to the point that it affected their health. In America, they had been anticipating this for decades. And they had actually, one of the presidents realized that there was something like this that could affect all of the world. And so they began to dedicate millions and over, I think almost over $1 billion for this crisis. And there was another president after that decided to cancel, said we don't need all of this, and then COVID came, so they weren't ready. Countries that took very extreme and unreasonable actions. And there are other countries like China, you know, I don't have to tell you. Not only the cause, but the way they dealt with their people is inhumane, even till now. So on the world stage, this is what was happening. The same thing happened in the business industry where everyone was at home. So different businesses dealt with it differently. And some insisted to be very harsh and demanding. I know some people, they said they demanded them to come to work, even though they had no precautions against the illness, against the virus. And there were other people that almost shut down the work, and there's no plan even for starting again. There were some who were monitoring by the minute, like they hire someone to monitor all of them, check with them every 5 minutes. What did you do now? What did you do? So there's more than one crisis that took place. And the leadership, the weak leadership, became very apparent because it affects the family, it affects the work or the business, even in some sense affect the church. We had to deal with it like to see how each parish dealt with it in different ways. And we learned a lot about, in time of crisis, you learn a lot about people, especially. In the American Revolution, there were about 3 million people, and they had over 6 to 8 very strong leaders. So they were able to navigate in one of the most important parts, and I know our history is very recent and modern. But they say now, in the most critical time, the leadership, like we were looking and very surprised at sometimes how weak leadership can be in the most strongest and powerful countries. And so the people who specialize in leadership, they're saying this is a crisis that's not just for now, but when you look at how people are dealing with it, we are, the strong leaders look in the future and say, what needs to be done and how can we equip ourselves for what's coming. I'm not talking about epidemics or pandemics. I'm speaking about the world has a much greater challenge, and we are facing deterioration in many levels, not just in education, not just in science, but in many levels. Before I came, there was someone who introduced me to a book that was written about 200 years ago by one of the people who studied all of the civilizations in the world at the time, 200 years ago. So he has a very thick book. And his analysis, he was saying that every civilization has 2 things they can focus on. Either they focus on building
and with a clear vision, usually with God, sometimes without God, but focusing on building their people for the best, or they focus on other issues, the social issues, entertainment, other things, freedom, some type of morals or lack of morals. And he said a civilization can't do both. They think they can, but they don't. They end up to do this, like for building and edifying, or in general, just really some things, discussion and waste, and more for. And he said that the second one eventually disappears and is overtaken by the civilizations that are in the first category. And this person who presented the book was saying that this was a warning 200 years ago of what's happening now in the Western world. And if we're not careful, I mean, there is this deterioration. And the same thing can happen also with the leadership, not just in a business or in a church, but also in the home, in the family. The leadership, the strong leadership for raising children and are blessed. So I'd like to turn to one of my favorite books in the Bible, the book of Nehemiah, and the book is on leadership without any doubt. It is a short book. It has 5 main chapters that speak about service and leadership. Greenleaf, also an American who focused on servant leadership and how every leader needs to be a servant in order to effectively reach their goals. I'm not going to focus on all of them. I will focus parts or glimpses primarily from the first chapter. And if we learn some of these tools or these virtues in the first chapter, you can read the rest and meditate on the rest before. Sometimes in the beginning of a certain task or mission, and I like to go back to this, so to realign what I know I need, what God is asking for me to do in my service, my ministry, so that we don't go astray. And I think it can be beneficial if we all do the same. Just a little bit of background. The book of Nehemiah comes at a critical time in the history of Israel. After the destruction of Jerusalem, you'll find that there are different leaders that God put for the people of Israel. Jeremiah was the weeping prophet to announce the destruction was coming, why it came, and to lead the people to repentance. During the time of captivity, God sent Daniel and the 3 holy youth, and we heard about them a couple of years ago with the younger. We meditated on them and how that they were examples of how God still asked them to be holy in a different environment and led them to preserve their faith, what God had taught them, so that not only they'll be saved to return to Israel, but also that they could lead other people. After that, you have Zerubbabel and Ezra that were led to how to return to God, and then finally rebuild the temple, and some of the homes and things like that were rebuilt. But then finally, Nehemiah, how do you say Nehemiah in Dutch? It's spelled the same. Okay, more like that. Sorry for the accent. I will speak about explaining. You will see how Nehemiah helped to rebuild the walls. And it's one of the final stages, but one of the most important stages for the people of Israel. What you see in this brief list is that in each era, God chose certain leaders, and they are related to one another. And each of their call is different. It's related, but different to the one before and the one after. And if we look at this from a wide lens, we see that also our life is the same. God calls each of us to do different tasks, different mission, and it's related to one another. And if I understand that, then I know what's my mission and purpose and how it's related to the people around me. Sometimes I'm called to help and equip other people, defend other people, lift up other people, guide and direct in one sense, or just labor and support other people's mission. And so I think it's very fruitful. The ancient city of Jerusalem was one of the most important, one of the most ancient features were its walls. The walls are different. There are different layers and then depending on where you are in the city, you see that it needed different type of care. It wasn't easy, as you're seeing here, like you have a building and you just build a wall. The walls have several different features, and sometimes, as you see here, extremely thick or very high. So if we can read from the first 3 verses, we need a few volunteers. I know that you may be more shy than the younger. Very shy than the younger.
De woorden van
Yes.
De woorden van Nehemia, de zoon van Haggaia. Het gebeurde in de maand Gisleu in het 20ste jaar toen ik de burcht Susan was. Dat Hanani kwam, een van mijn broers, hij en mannen uit Juda. Ik vroeg hen naar de Joden die ontkomen waren, die uit de gevangenschap overgebleven waren, en naar Jeruzalem. Zij zeiden tegen mij, de overgeblevenen die uit de gevangenschap daar in het gewest zijn overgebleven, verkeren in grote ellende en in smaad. In de muur van Jeruzalem zijn bressen geslagen en zijn poorten zijn met vuur verbrand.
So the first part of the book describes what is this Babylonian captivity which took place in 587, and by the time that Nehemiah was called to restore it. And although it's a very short description, we see one of the most important characteristics of Nehemiah, and it tells us at the end what is his job. And I find it always very interesting after Nehemiah. Usually when someone introduces themselves today, you'll say your name, maybe your background, maybe what you do, and that's it. And of course, in our society, what you do is the most important thing. You might spend 20, 30 minutes speaking about careers, especially when you don't want to speak about it to someone. They will ask until they know exactly what you do. But Nehemiah doesn't do this. Actually, at the very end, he tells us, by the way, that he was the king's cupbearer, which was one of the most important, prestigious, powerful positions, especially for a Jew living in Babylon. And it tells us from the very beginning that Nehemiah knows that his mission and purpose is not to be a cupbearer. God allowed him to be a cupbearer because of his mission and purpose. For example, God did not create me to be a lawyer or doctor, engineer, IT, but I am those things so that I can fulfill what God asked me to do. And sometimes it's not as relevant as we think. You say, well, why did I spend all my time? It's important. It was useful, depending on what God is going to do with those skills. But sometimes this focus, although it sounds very similar, is very different when it's applied. So the first thing is how to know what is the call. There are many types of leaders, but if you read in most of the leadership, what we are leading in is what we are called to, what God wants us and calls us to do. Then we can lead, right? There's a difference in someone says, you know what, I want to be a leader in politics or in education. We self-select. But there's a difference. There's a difference when God is calling us to do something. And some people say, well, I'm not a priest, I'm not a servant. Everyone is called. We have a general call to be saved, to come to the knowledge of truth, general call for holiness. But there's specific call for how we will fulfill it. And God calls each one of us to do something. I'll say it again and again because some people say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. No, we have a specific mission and purpose while we are on this earth. And everyone's mission is different than the rest. And if I'm living without knowing this, then I'm not living my full potential. I'm not reaching what is this goal that God desires for me, with me. And many people are living, this is why I think in the last year or so, like this is all I'm speaking about, really, at least when I go back. Because there are so many bright, successful, talented, holy, righteous youth like you who are living but not fulfilling, accomplishing but not working the work of God. They are going through task after task, but confused or unsure, maybe unsure, uncertain. What is this that God is asking for me? And the more I work, it doesn't necessarily mean I have the answers. On the opposite, some people work so much and then they say, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I was talking to someone a couple months ago. She accomplished many things. She very good career, very good position, time where she needs to start to search to get married. She has some ideas and says, I'm going to change my career. I said, why? Her parents said the same. Why? I did this because process of elimination. I didn't like medicine. I didn't want to do medicine. I didn't want to do this. So I went, I think she engineer. Not medicine, not law, engineer. We have the three. So she stopped there. She did very good. She worked very top. She said, I don't enjoy it. But you're good at it. Doesn't matter. I need to do what is my mission, what is my passion. She said, that's true, but we should have talked about this 5 years ago, maybe more, which is true. And that's why what we try to do now is to prevent this from happening. And it doesn't mean you have to change career, necessarily. But what it means is that we have to have clarity of purpose. Because yes, life is too short for us to be working and working without knowing where we are going. But many people will push us to work and work without this. It's not important. But in a sense, it is important. It is essential. Again, not just for the priests, but this is the work for us in order, how do I recognize? That's why God tells for many of his chosen in the Old Testament, who can I send? Who shall I send? And when God asked this question, all of the prophets, when they hear it, they say, me, send me. But how to recognize the call of the leader. And there's different types of calls. We say there's three. There's the burning heart, comes from within. There's the burning bush, and there's the burning city or the burning house. What's the difference? The first one, which is the burning heart, and that's what I started. You must do what you are called to do. And you feel that I will not have fulfillment or satisfaction until I accomplish this. Even if the person spends hours of their day doing this task, they are not tired, they're not complaining, they are even more energetic, and you see these people, very passionate about what they do, and it gives them this joy and zeal. And other people come to and say, what are you doing? And they're very, very passionate about it. They try to express it, but maybe no one else has it. And this passion comes with a responsibility, because God allowed us to see and to realize what it is, and it is enough for good leadership today. And when it's not there, then we become lukewarm. And we have a lot of lukewarm people in the world, a lot of cities and lukewarm. We're just more. We don't want to go this way, we're just stable. But life is not necessarily about stability. For good leaders, sometimes it's the opposite. In order to go to another direction, needs to have a turn. So this is in terms of the burning. I don't know why all of this is moving slowly. Okay. Maybe we can read the call for David.
Toen stond David 's morgens vroeg op. Hij liet de schapen bij een hoeder, nam het voedsel en ging op weg zoals Isaï hem bevolen had. Hij kwam bij het wagenkamp aan toen het leger uittrok naar de gevechtslinie en men het ten strijde riep. Hij sprak dezelfde woorden en David hoorde ze. Maar toen de mannen van Israël die man zagen, vluchtten zij allen voor hem weg en waren ze zeer bevreesd. De mannen van Israël zeiden, hebt u die man wel gezien die gekomen is? Want hij is gekomen om Israël te honen. De koning zal de man die hem verslaat groot rijkdom schenken. Hij zal hem zijn dochter tot vrouw geven en het huis van zijn vader vrijstellen van lasten in Israël.
So David heard the same call that everyone had received, and it was the same problem that everyone saw of Goliath. But David's response was very different than everyone else. Everyone in Israel at that time was afraid, including the king. It's going to be more challenging. And so, in order to see the leadership of David, it was a clear call from within him how to respond, and we'll see how he says it. You can continue, whoever can.
Toen zei David tegen de mannen die bij hem stonden: wat zal de mens, de man doen die deze Filistijn verslaat en de smaad van Israëls afwendt? Want wie is deze onbesneden Filistijn wel dat hij de gelederen van de levende God durft te honnen? Het volk gaf hem hetzelfde antwoord: zo zal men de man doen die hem verslaat.
So for David, his response was this. He said, who is this person? What is he doing? How can he say this? And not only that, how can we say nothing and do nothing? Like he had a zeal within him to say that this person has to be stopped. Not because I'm angry of what he's saying, but because he's defying the God of Israel. And that affects each one of us. It's not just words that I can ignore and hope and pray that it goes away. He said, not only it has to go away, it has to be clear to all of the other people, whether it's the people of Israel or the others that are not of the people of Israel, that what he is saying and doing is against God. And that means, I think David knows, he has to be killed in a way that will teach all of the other people. So he said, don't worry, if you're not going to do it, I will do it, don't worry. That was David's conclusion. Not because I'm better or stronger, on the opposite. They looked at him and said, who are you? What are you going to do? How are you going to do that? So when it's the problem with the animation. I should have checked this. So what he said, don't worry, I will go. And Saul in the beginning says, no, you can't do this. So David, in order to explain, he says that nobody worry what's going to happen. I will go and fight. He said, why? He said, I already fought the lion and the bear, and he's a bigger version. What's the lion? The lion and the bear are trying to kill David and the other people. And he said, I know that I'm very small, very weak. I don't have the skill, but when I fight with God, any enemy, it doesn't matter. That was the lesson he learned. That's why he wasn't afraid. The people, the soldiers, were fighting together, but I think many of them depended on each other. They said, we're a big army, we're very strong, we have all these weapons. When we go to fight, they're fighting together, but David was always by himself. He was kind of forgotten. He was neglected. But when he's faced with very difficult challenges, God is fighting with him and for him. So he said, okay, I can take care of this. And he knew that if the God of Israel is with them, nobody can be against them. So whoever is going to go out is going to win. That's the principle that David had. Because if he loses, it affects all of the people of Israel. It's like, it's win-win. This is God's battle, not my battle. I'm elected, I'm called to go in this situation, and whoever goes with the power will win. This is the mystery that David was trying to explain to the rest. The funny thing is that usually it should be that the king is the one that's convincing the other people to fight. When you see David as a king, he's convincing the people. On the opposite, David now, as one of the subjects in the kingdom, is convincing the king that to let me fight. And the one who is not soldier in the same way. And this is a sign that he is called to this purpose. When you maybe lack the experience, lack the authority, lack the money, but you have this conviction to fulfill certain purpose, sometimes very clear sign that God is calling you to do something. And you can't sleep or rest as long as this problem is there, because you know this problem is relating not only to the salvation for what I have to do, but many other people. And his concern was for the people of Israel, for the name of God. If that is your motivation, the name of God and the power of the people of God, this is very clear sign that this is the work of God. Okay. Second type. So this is going to be harder than that. The second call, the second type of call is the burning bush. Now, it's not necessarily within. Moses, when he was called, he didn't have this conviction. He had it 40 years before, right? He was told he's going to liberate the people of Israel from the Egyptians, from Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And he tried in the beginning, and he killed the Egyptian. It didn't work. And the opposite, he went, and he probably thought, that's it. I made a mistake. God will find someone else. So he lived in the desert until this day for the burning bush. And it was very strange for Moses, because he said, I spent 40 years here. I'm near retirement, like 80 years. Time to, okay, he's lived a quiet life. He's away from the people. I'm living simple life. And God said, okay, now we need you. He said, what do you mean? To do what? People of Israel are still there. So although it started with a burning heart, this was very clear sign that this call and purpose and direction was for him to do. He didn't have to test, well, let me see if this is really it. No, he knew exactly what God wanted from him. The first one may be hard to discern because of the motivations. But the second one is very clear. He just was reluctant and resistant in order to do it. And he tried to escape several times and couldn't. So if this is the call, then we'll be able to see the burning bush. Who can read for us one of my favorite chapters?
En Mozes hoedde het kleinvee van zijn schoonvader Jethro, de priester van Midian. Hij dreef het kleinvee tot voorbij de woestijn. En hij kwam bij de berg van God, de Horeb. En de engel van de Heere verscheen hem in een vuurvlam uit het midden van een doornstruik. Hij keek toe en zie, de doornstruik brandde in het vuur, maar de doornstruik werd niet verteerd. Mozes zei, laat ik nu naar dat indrukwekkende verschijnsel gaan kijken, waarom de doornstruik niet verbrandt. Toen de Heere zag dat hij ging kijken, riep God tot hem uit het midden van de doornstruik en zei, Mozes, Mozes. Hij zei, zie, hier ben ik.
Okay, one of my questions, always see in verse 2, so he's with the sheep, and then all of a sudden he sees the bush. It says he saw that the bush was not burning. But then verse 3, what do you, yeah, you have it numbered. What is verse 3 telling us? She knows. Yeah, what is verse 3 telling us? This is the shift. He saw the burning bush, but there was still something Moses needed to have to recognize the call. God didn't speak from the beginning. After verse 3, then the Lord speaks. And sometimes we're around a burning bush, but because of verse 3, we don't get to the call. And God prepared it for us. The own interest? Okay, I need what is the reaction? Before, he doesn't know what he's doing yet. He just sees the burning bush.
Courage?
Courage? Something before courage. He doesn't know. Look, in verse 3, he just sees the bush. Bush is here. And then after a while, God calls. But there's something in there, someone said it.
Curious?
Curiosity, and more than curiosity. It's something else. It is curiosity, and after curiosity. Because it says here. Yes, it's a search for the meaning. It's an amazement. Why does, you see Moses' hand sometimes in the Coptic icons, he will be like this. Here, the iconographer put him, this is usually the sign in the Coptic icons of amazement and wonder. And when we see a sign that God is giving to us, we say, okay, well, yeah, we're amazed. Not always, no. Sometimes we see, say, that's nice, and we go home, right? And God is trying to call us to something. I saw something strange. And that's it. Next day. Didn't something strange happen to you yesterday? What do you mean? Oh, yes. So it's an amazement and wonder what God is doing in our life. And when he turns, then he hears, Moses, Moses. Why 2 times? I think I already told them before. Yes, no? Many of the righteous are called with double name. Abraham, Abraham, Moses, Moses. Samuel, Samuel, we'll get to it in a little bit. It is to make sure that you're not imagining, but it's also telling you that something important is coming. There's a lot of work. And before God tells him what he has to do, he has to respond to say, here I am, and then comes the message. So it's the same thing. You see the bush, there has to be amazement. He takes an action in order to investigate. Then he hears, Moses, Moses, he takes another action. So our reaction with what God is doing in our life is essential for us to know what's next. But sometimes we don't react. We ignore, we delay, we assume, presume. We just talk about it, but we don't react properly. And if we don't take the right action, we won't be able to get to the next verse in our life. So we have the burning heart, we have the burning bush, and the third thing is the burning city. Nehemiah was a burning city. Everything was on fire still. But the way that he responded to it was different than everyone else. He was very far off away, and he could not rest until he works for the change in the city. So this is a unique type of call, and this is what he was told. We read it already. Sorry. This is going to be an Emre. Someone can read for us the call of Esther, which is similar. This is also a burning city.
Toen Mordechai alles te weten was gekomen wat er gebeurd was, scheurde Mordechai zijn kleren en hulde zich in zijn zak en as. Hij ging door het midden van de stad en weeklaagde luid en bitter. En hij kwam tot voor de poort van de koning, want niemand mocht de poort van de koning binnengaan, gehuld in een rouwengewaad. En overal in elk gewest en in elke plaats waar het bevel van de koning en zijn wet was aangekomen, was er grote rouw bij de Joden. Met vaste geween en rouwklacht, velen lagen in zakken as. Toen kwamen de dienaressen van Esther en haar hovelingen, en zij vertelden het haar, en de koning was zeer ontdaan, en zij stuurde kleren om die Mordechai aan te trekken, en zijn rouwgewaad af te leggen, maar hij nam ze niet aan.
So, Esther was also facing the same thing as all the other people, except when she tried to kind of ignore it and dismiss it or wonder what should be done, she was clearly told that there has to be an action from inside the palace, and you are here for this purpose. And again, she was a little bit hesitant, but they said that you can't be silent because the people of Israel, it's going to affect not just 1 or 2 people, all of the people of Israel everywhere, including all your family, everyone you care about. So if she stays silent, yes, she may live, maybe, but all the other people are affected. So she has to act. She's kind of cornered. And the same thing with the burning bush. I mean, you could walk away, but you imagine too, if he's in the desert, the bush could keep spreading, like in other locations, until Moses responds. So this is the clear call for God for her. And so the response, here I am, the response to the call, because some people, although they hear the call, they don't want to respond. Sometimes it's days, other people weeks, some people years. They know that what they're supposed to do, but they kind of postpone, neglect. And usually the call gets louder and louder until we respond. And God keeps knocking. We can read Actually, I'll summarize the first two. You see the call of Abraham, like I said, Abraham, Abraham, and Jacob, Jacob, and Moses, Moses. The names are repeated, and a slightly different thing happens with Samuel, which we'll get to in a little bit. The Holy Virgin Mary had another call, and the unique thing when you read in the Gospel of Luke, that the angel speaks for a long time. St. Mary says two things. The first thing is question, basically how? How can this be? Not just because it wasn't the same question as Zechariah and Elizabeth, because other people, other elders had children when God wanted to do work. There were many people that miraculously had, but for St. Mary, she said, how can this happen? Because it's not my desire. Or for Joseph, she knows. And so that's why she needed the clarification. Once she gets the clarification, she says one sentence. Basically, behold, maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word. Basically, amen. Whatever you say, I will do. This is the response. And then her life changes. After that sentence, the angel even left. She said, well, you don't have any other questions? No, that's it. The angel came for her to accept the will of God. He announced. Once she accepted, the angel disappeared. Because he knows his purpose, she knows her purpose now, and then she went to work. Like an amazing thing for the Holy Virgin Mary. She responded in a way, maybe some of us would maybe write notes, ask questions, talk to someone, go to Abuna, pray a little bit, let me fast. St. Mary, there's no doubt. She doesn't have to consult anyone. The angel, God sent the angel for her. So I think we see a model of perfect obedience for her. Samuel, interesting thing, when you look, God calls him several times, but he didn't recognize the voice. He went to Eli. First time is Samuel. Here I am. Second time, at least in the English I looked, I think in the Dutch it's slightly different. I didn't have time to look at the other languages. But what I liked about this is the response of Samuel, at least in English. Every time the call comes, he responds in a more clear way. First he says, here I am. Then he said, here I am, you called me. And they said, no, I didn't. And then the second one said, no, surely you called me. Basically, I heard. I know what I heard. And he's responding each time. Then, because he didn't respond fully, Eli told him, no. This is not my voice. God is calling you. So he said, okay, what do I do? He said, okay, speak, Lord, for yourself. What's the difference? God could have spoken. If he said Samuel, he could have told him from the beginning, okay, this is what I need you to do. I'm God. Like with Moses, I'm the God of your fathers. But with Samuel, it was different. He still didn't recognize the voice of God. He was lacking in that knowledge. And so once he had a little bit of clarification, then the message can continue. And the problem with the call, again, if I don't respond properly and ask for this, pray for this, seek advice for this, the message, the calling can't continue. This is an important work. God didn't call me to do it. I know. I would have known by now if God speaks. God spoke to all the other people. He doesn't speak to me. Are you responding and reacting in the proper way? Leaving everything, like for all of them, Moses was in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't by coincidence. He didn't plan it. God calls us when we are separate from everything. Joseph wasn't in the house when the Holy Virgin Mary was. That was by design. Why? Because we need the quiet place, separate from the rest. And sometimes we're so busy, we don't enter into the quiet place for God to call us. So do I have to leave everything? Maybe for a short time. I'm not saying go spend 40 years. One time there was one of the youth, he said, I need to hear the voice of God. We were trying to work with him so he can have a retreat. So I arranged, we didn't have a place yet where he could stay in the Coptic church. So I arranged at one of the monasteries that he could stay for 3 days. I told him what to do, and set everything. I said, once you get there, call me. Okay, very good. So the time came when he was supposed to reach, and then, so I called him. I said, oh, maybe he reached, and he didn't check or he forgot. So then I called him, he answered. I said, wait, I thought they don't allow phones. I said, how are you answering? Did you get lost? He said, no, I left. I said, what do you mean you left? You just planning this? They have a very strict system. It takes sometimes months to reserve 3 days. So I said, what happened? He said, I went, I have the room, they told me everything that I could do. I had started to read in the Bible, and I didn't know what to do, it was too quiet. I read, I couldn't focus. He said, what do you mean you can't focus? He was so used to the busyness that when it gets too quiet, he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to react. So he said, okay, this was my mistake. I didn't train and prepare him properly. I underestimate. Like usually we're chasing and waiting for the time where it's quiet enough so we can hear God's voice, so we know what to do. But sometimes it needs more preparation so that we can recognize God's voice and we react properly. It sounds easy, but because of all the other voices that you hear chronically, constantly, it becomes more and more difficult. Now the Lord came and stood and called us the other time Samuel. Samuel, this time twice. First time he just said Samuel, because now is different, slightly different. So he said, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening, and he has the care. The third thing, which is the call and the characteristics of the servant. When God calls, he equips, he directs, and he gives very specific instruction. Sometimes we want more specific, but when you start working, you see the direction. So God called St. Paul, and he knows that he's going to the Gentiles. Exactly which city to start, he didn't tell him, right? He said, first go to a city called Straight. He went, he knows where he's baptized, and then afterwards he went to the apostles. Makes sense. They rejected him. He went to Arabia for 3 years. After he went, then he came back, and he started again with apostles, but he knew he has to go to different cities around. And God would direct him in different ways in those cities. By the first, second, third time, he knows very clear how God gave him a special system for him in order to serve. And the same thing you see with the saints and the apostles. So like St. Mark, knowing this, he went to Alexandria, you know the story. With the shoe, I mean, if you go and enter a city and your shoe breaks, and you have to go to the store and buy or fix your shoes, you'll know from the story, oh, this happened to St. Mark. And the one that I'm going to is Anianus, and he's going to be the future bishop. He didn't know any of this. All he knows is that I have a problem, I go fix the problem. When he fixed the problem, the person said, one God. So he said, what is this one God? He began to speak. See how quick he was to respond. He said, okay, I'm going to declare this one. So the man was so moved, he said, no, come to my house. Speak to my family. So he did the same thing. He said, do you have anyone else? He said, yes, I'm going to get my friends. By the time, short time, you find it full of most of Alexandria was listening to St. Mark. So he recognized how God is working. This is the place where I need to be. Even though originally was not his plan. For Nehemiah, I know there's 7 characteristics. I'm going to go through them very quickly because of the time. But these are just points that when you read in the book of Nehemiah, you can see the characteristics. The first thing, Nehemiah was not, you have no nonsense. He is not just fooling. Some people, they just live, just enjoyment. He's very serious in his life. And the leaders in this world have to be very serious. Not to mean that they don't have sense of humor. But when they come to do the work, it is done well. And is done according to what God wants. It means that we don't focus on positions or titles, or even sometimes the salaries. It means that we need to have, we don't need to have a position like in the world, say, the president term is up, so we need to have another president in order to function. As opposed to, we have a problem, we need to find the president to fix the problem. It's very different mentality. So we are called to work in order to fulfill what God wants us to do. The second thing is the heart, is empathetic heart, and very similar, I think, in Dutch. So how that his heart was with the people, that again, his people, thousands. Sometimes we are so busy with what's happening in my life, I don't see or care about what's happening around, whether it's my family, my friends, co-workers, people in the church, or other people in this world. The empathetic heart is what motivates the right leaders, because he or she cares about the others, and not just in the physical terms, but in the way of salvation. And what motivates you, your care for the others, that is part of your calling and mission. So this is the work of God. The third thing is how the servant educates himself, herself, and is able to get the right information in order to do the right task, right? There can be a problem, but a problem can come from many different reasons. The amazing thing about Nehemiah is that he goes and investigates, and he asks, and he said, where were the people captive? What was happening? What's needed there? And then he goes to the king after he studies and says, what do you need? The amazing thing with Nehemiah, he had a list. He already knows. I need soldiers to protect me. I need equipment to rebuild. I need permission from you so that I can reach the cities. He thought about everything before he reached Jerusalem. Because on his mind, whenever he's praying, God tells me, oh, what if it's dangerous? Oh, I need soldiers. Well, what about, how am I going to find this? Oh, the king has all this. Okay, so he went to the king ready. That's why he didn't waste time. And when God calls you to do something, he will also equip you. He will let you realize the big picture and the problems that are going to face you in the future, not just what's now, but what's coming. The third thing, when he reached, do you know the first thing that he did, Nehemiah? He entered. He's waiting for maybe months to enter. The first thing he did. That's the picture. This is St. George, but I just used St. George. He went on his horse at night, and he went through all of the walls. Why at night? So nobody could see him or bother or distract him. Second of all, it said he took about 3 days. He wants to see every part of the wall that needs work. What is the condition? I'm not going to depend on other people to tell me what's needed, because the leader knows by himself what is the condition, what is the status. Some people, when we ask if there's a problem in the church, no, everything is fine, there's no problem. Right, like someone who's sick, you go to the doctor, he said, what's wrong? He said, everything's okay. He said, no, his family made me come because of 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not okay. So the doctor needs to make investigation, fully scan. Someone told me recently, every once in a while you should probably do full body scan. I said, why? I said, there's some diseases that go without being detected and can now, it's very expensive, so most people don't think about it or are told to do it. But if you search several years from now, but sometimes the same thing in the service, we need to do full analysis when we are serving. And when you are looking sincerely, you will find many things that other people didn't see. Why? Because if God calls you for this, then when you investigate, you'll be able to identify what is the issue. So he went about at night, went through all the different gates, and searched, just like God says, I searched Jerusalem with a lamp. It is a picture of the soul when God is looking in the soul to see what is all the weaknesses inside. So as he is looking, Nehemiah, at the walls, it is exactly what God does within us, to see what's all the weaknesses and the strengths. Where does the work need to happen? And the good leaders, if they do this for the walls, they're able to do it for the people they serve as well. Well, this person is being very difficult, maybe disobedient, maybe stubborn, and then if I look carefully, I'll know why. So then I'll be able to help them. This person doesn't want to listen to anyone. Why? The good leader is able to assess properly. And that's why the solutions come from the good leaders, even to the point where Nehemiah knew approximately how much it would cost, what was needed, and even the time that it would take, but he didn't give the king a specific time. He said, when we finish, I will come back. So this is part of the education and the examination that needs to do even afterwards. Throughout the work, Nehemiah was repeatedly examining and evaluating. And even in our life, when we have this mission and purpose, it needs a regular examination, at least once a year, or from project to project, period to period, to make the proper evaluation. Also, motivation, the motivation. When I heard these words, I sat down, wept, and mourned for many days, and I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. The amazing thing also of Nehemiah is that when he prays, especially after he hears of the situation of the people of Israel, he is repenting for the sins of the other people. There's one time a servant, he was confessing to Abuna B'Shur. He was one of the great servants in the church. And Abuna said his confession, it doesn't sound right. Like he's saying things that no way he can do them. So he asked him, he said, I don't believe you are doing this. So he says, true, I'm not. I live with people, and this is what I see. And I feel that I'm sinning like they are sinning. And I'm repenting, hoping that God will lead them to repentance. I'm not saying this so you go and confess what all your friends and family are doing. But to give this was the heart of Nehemiah, that he was repenting for the sins of the people of Israel. And God heard his confession, and that's why he was a leader. That's why God chose him. He said, you care enough for them that you are praying for their salvation. I will use you to work for their salvation. This is the heart that I need. Not like before when Moses was saying, send someone else. Intercessor, you will find several prayers in the book of Nehemiah. Every step that Nehemiah takes, that he is praying. So he prays when he hears the news. He prays in his heart when the king asks him the question. He prays before he goes back to the king with the details and explanation. Every step that he is challenged. And so this is one in the first book. You'll see the powerful prayers of Nehemiah. Not only they used to read and sometimes memorize them, they would study them to know how to pray. How to pray for, if you want to be a good leader, you have to know how to pray for the people that you are entrusted with and you're entrusted for. Okay. The prayer of the heart. Go to the active administrator. I think a unique factor of the book of Nehemiah is this. Like he is very, I'm sure you have some accountants here. He's a good accountant and good evaluator. He knows the number of people because he does the census. He knows the perimeter. So he knows in detail what it takes to fulfill all of the needs. It's not just general and fuzzy, like general knowledge, but he has specifics. You know, there are some leaders that make decisions based on just feelings, emotions, general statements, without looking actually at the details. Because sometimes it's the person who's reporting is not accurate, intentionally or unintentionally. So this was also part of his active and proactive work. So they could, people react differently in crisis. And there are some, just criticizing. But the good leader is the one who sees the same crisis, but able to take the right action. And that's why they are chosen and called to do this. I think also is related to this, the leader who doesn't give up, that has the forbearance, that isn't shaken by the wind. You know, St. Mark, when he started in the service, With St. Paul, there was a problem and he left. We don't know all the details. St. Luke didn't want to say all the problem. So he left. And it was very big division or discussion between Paul and Barnabas over what to do with St. Mark. And it was difficult. St. Barnabas said, I can work with him. I can encourage him. St. Paul said, it's too dangerous. You can't have, he's young, he's a little bit afraid, let him go back home. So anyways, they parted. They separated different ways. The important thing is that St. Paul later, he realized, no, St. Mark, I need him now. He's a good leader. And this is the mark of good leadership. That yes, there are certain conditions didn't allow him to continue, but that means there's also a certain time and ability how to recognize that as well. So this is the main call for us, how to do it. I will go to the last one, which is how to be the holy example. The holy example of the servant it knows how to deal with criticism. Because if you look especially in chapter 3, it's getting criticized from inside and outside. Nehemiah faces several challenges. He also knows how to deal with to remain constant in the goal that he's seeking for the example. He knows how to encourage each one how to do their work. One of the first things when they got the wall, so it's hard where to start. Everyone wants to start in what's near them to be safe. So he had a very difficult, people said no, the temple, other people said no, protect the place where it's most weak, where the enemy is going to come. Other people said no, we need to just do all of it together. So he said to the people, look, each one you build in front of your house. Why? Everyone wants their place in front of them to be protected. And they care about it every day, they're going to see it, so they're going to build it perfect. So they started that way, building next in their house. And that's what God even calls us to do when we build. You say in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and all the ends of the earth. So what is closest to you? And then he helped to put a plan by evaluating this. What's the next step that needs to be done? That each one builds together, and we build together for the same purpose of the glory of God. What is the good leadership in the eyes of Nehemiah was that, yeah, the main goal is accomplished, but the way that it's done, it's through all of these things, right? It's through when you have someone who is serious and is focused, someone who is empathetic, has the right heart for the leader, someone who's educated and evaluates from time to time, someone who is motivated by repentance, let's say matanya, that's the change of mind, someone who is interceding and praying for the others, someone who's active, and the last one, which I know is not in the Dutch, but in the English, which is the holiness, that is the main cause for the work. May the Lord give us the grace and the blessing to serve, to listen to the call, and be faithful to him. Glory be to him now and ever to be.